Photoshop, setting fire to paper, the neuralizer from Men in Black. There are all kinds of ways to try to erase people from the history books. Making the wrong enemies at the wrong time or living at the wrong time would have meant that all the important things you did in life and the legacy you tried to leave behind simply vanished. Here are some important people who were erased from history. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more Nutty history. Wait. I mean, we can't really make a video about people who were completely erased from history. There wouldn't even be a video to be made. Here are some important people who were nearly erased from history. Damning a memory. The Romans had a phrase called damnatio memoriae. Sounds like a spell Harry Potter would fling on Draco Malfoy, and it wasn't too far off. Damnatio memoriae translates to damning a memory. Legacy was everything in ancient Rome, and wiping out the memory of your existence was one of the biggest middle fingers someone could give you. Unfortunately, for an emperor named Publius Septimius Geta, it was his own brother who was flipping him the bird. Geta and his brother Caracalla were given joint command of the empire when their father, Septimius Severus, died in 211. It immediately didn't go well. The two brothers were constantly paranoid about being taken out by one another. Their imperial palace was split into two different sections, and neither allowed the other servants to cross the border. They could agree on so little that they even floated the idea of splitting the empire in half so they could have more space. Their mother, Julia Domna, was caught in the middle of this sibling rivalry. She convinced Geta and Caracalla that splitting up the empire would be a bad move, and kept wanting her sons to kiss and make up. Well, that wasn't going to happen. She arranged a meeting between the two at her residence, but instead of talking it out, Caracalla had a centurion kill Geta. He apparently died in his mother's arms. After Geta's death, his body was quickly removed from the palace and his body was disposed of in secret. Then the damnatio memoriae was on. Caracalla immediately began a campaign to eliminate all references to his brother. Geta's name was removed from inscriptions, coins, and official records. All his honors went poof. His statues were defaced, in many cases literally chiseled away. One we can still see today is the Arch of Septimius Severus, a statue commemorating the military victories of the Severan dynasty, including Geta's. It still stands in the Roman Forum. If you go to see it, you'll notice a curious scratch mark where Geta's name used to be. Caracalla had it removed. Caracalla also purged people who had been loyal to Geta. Senators and military officials were either locked up, exiled, or their lives were just straight up ended. It's said that over 20,000 people died during the ensuing attempts to snuff out all traces of Geta. Caracalla also literally tried to rewrite history without his brother in it. He coerced and threatened historians and writers into either downplaying Geta's role in Rome or deleting any references to him whatsoever. And, I mean, it kind of worked. Have you ever heard of Roman Emperor Geta? His name was basically erased from official historical records. Luckily for Geta, his brother wasn't entirely successful in erasing his brother from history, which is why we're talking about him now. Nikolai Yeshov. Stalin was pretty good at disappearing people. The Soviet dictator was responsible for maybe 20 million deaths during his 30-year reign. Some of those used to be his closest allies. For a few years, Nikolai Yeshov was the second most powerful man in the Soviet Union. Nicknamed the Bloody Dwarf because of his short stature and sadistic tendency to order mass killing upon mass killing, Yeshov was an erratic guy. He had a near debilitating phobia for elevators. He had a personal vendetta against piano players, ordering the deaths of dozens of them because he thought there were anti-Soviet messages hidden in their ivory tickling. He was also prone to break out into spontaneous bouts of weeping during meetings. Yeshov served as the People's Commissar for Internal Affairs, commonly known as the head of the NKVD. He was one of Stalin's most trusted confidants and played a big role in the Great Purge, a 2-year blitzkrieg against anyone who may have been anti-Soviet. Millions of people either died, disappeared, were punished in prison, or sent to camps in Siberia. Yet despite his rabid loyalty to Stalin and his paranoid cause, Yeshov eventually fell victim to the very system he helped perpetrate. Stalin became increasingly suspicious that Yeshov was up to no good. We don't really know if he was or wasn't plotting against Stalin. It was probably one of those cases where, from Stalin's perspective, you spend so much time arresting your perceived enemies that everyone becomes an enemy. It didn't help that by 1938, Yeshov had become a horrible alcoholic. It said he walked around drunk all day and rarely even showed up to work. Close allies of Yeshov started disappearing. His wife passed away. It was pretty clear that Yeshov's end was drawing near. On April 10, 1938, Yeshov was secretly arrested, thrown in prison, and was punished until he confessed to being a spy and embezzling Soviet money. He was then given a closed-door trial and sentenced to death. At the sentencing, he apparently had one of his weeping bouts, this time for pretty justifiable reasons. On February 4th, Yeshov was killed in the basement of an NKVD building, a basement with sloping floors that he designed so blood was easier to clean. But the cruelty didn't stop with Yeshov's death. In characteristic fashion, Stalin then went about erasing all traces of Yeshov's existence. This included not only his physical elimination of the NKVD basement, but also the removal of his image from photographs and official records. Yeshov was airbrushed and cropped out of photographs where he had previously appeared alongside Stalin and other high-ranking officials, basically erasing his presence from history. Now you see him, now you don't. And it wasn't just Yeshov. Stalin loved photoshopping. Take this photo, for example, which shows Stalin with party leaders Nikolai Antipov, Sergei Kurov, and Nikolai Shvernik in 1926. It went from all four men to 3 to 2 until eventually it was just a portrait of Stalin. Grigory Nelyubov. The Soviets really had quite the art department at their state publishing houses. Their skill with an airbrush, a scalpel, and some glue was really pretty impressive. Another guy that the Soviets tried to delete from history was one of their famed cosmonauts. Grigory Nelyubov was part of the Sochi 6, a group of men who were selected as part of the Soviet Union's first group of cosmonauts in 1960. It was an elite group, including Yuri Gagarin, the guy who'd go on to become the first person in space. Nelyubov, unfortunately, would never be remembered the same way. Nelyubov's career hit a speed bump, mainly because he liked to hit the booze a bit too much. He was reportedly pretty tipsy during quite a few training exercises. And I don't know if you know this, but being drunk while trying to fly a spaceship is not the best recipe for success. Nelyubov was eventually kicked out of the program in 1963 for drunken disorderly conduct, though not before being given the chance to apologize and say it wouldn't happen again, which he refused to do. 3 years after his dismissal, the former cosmonaut stepped in front of a train. Unsurprisingly, a copious amount of alcohol was in his system. In order to avoid any bad press in their quest to beat the Americans to space, the Soviets went about purging Nelyubov from history. They airbrushed or scratched him out of group photos, so it appeared as though he'd never even been a part of the cosmonauts. All references to Nelyubov in official documents and reports were systematically snuffed out. His name was removed from any records related to the Sochi 6, which I guess became the Sochi 5, but it doesn't really have the same ring to it. Living in a madhouse, Nellie Bly. Let's move on now to some women who, while they were not intentionally erased from history, have been pretty blatantly overlooked, mostly because, well, they were women living in an era that was dominated by men. First up, we have one of history's most coolest women that you may never have heard of. Nellie Bly was a pioneer in investigative journalism, an adventurer who traveled around the world in 72 days, a novelist, and a patent inventor. Born Elizabeth Jane Cochran on May 5, 1864 in Pennsylvania, Bly got her start as a journalist writing for the Pittsburgh Dispatch, but wasn't too happy about the fact that she was only assigned women-related topics and moved to New York, where she struggled to find work as a woman in the male-dominated field of journalism. One day, Bly had had enough. She barged into the office of one Joseph Pulitzer, editor at the New York World, and a guy who will go on to have a pretty prestigious prize named after him. Bly expressed to Pulitzer that she wanted to write something about immigrants in the U.S. Pulitzer wasn't really interested in that, but liked her boldness and suggested she go investigate Blackwell's Island, one of the country's most secretive and notorious mental asylums. So she did. Bly studied how to behave as if she were mentally ill, then took on a fake identity and backstory. She presented herself as Nellie Brown, an immigrant who had recently arrived in the United States. She claimed to be seeking refuge in the U.S. after fleeing from an abusive husband, which was a pretty common narrative for women seeking admission to the asylum at the time. Once she was admitted to the asylum, Bly continued to act the part of a mentally ill patient. She feigned behaviors that the asylum staff were familiar with, like confusion and agitation, The whole time she was simultaneously mimicking the behaviors of actual patients and taking mental notes on the conditions in the asylum, which were apparently pretty horrible. The kicker was that there was no guarantee that Bly would actually be allowed to leave once she was admitted to the asylum. Even if she one day said, "All right guys, I was just faking it. I'm really an undercover journalist for the New York World, sent over here by one of the most famous journalists in history to report on what's going on," there was still a pretty good chance that the doctors would think she was even crazier. Luckily, the New York World assigned her a lawyer who, after 10 days, was able to get her out of there. The piece she ended up writing exposed the poor conditions at the asylum and led to some pretty significant reforms in the mental health system. It's touted as one of the first examples of investigative journalism. Audrey Munson. The woman described as America's first supermodel lived most of her life secluded in her room at an insane asylum. Her records were sealed. She was buried in an unmarked grave, and most of her family refused to even mention her name. She was basically erased from history. But why? Audrey Munson was discovered by the photographer Felix Benedict Herzog while she was window shopping with her mom in New York City. Her life would never be the same. Munson quickly became the go-to muse for sculptors and photographers across the country. Her likeness was used as the inspiration for more than 12 statues in New York alone, many of which are still standing. She then transitioned into film. One of the most notorious was the 1915 film Inspiration, where she appeared fully bare as a sculptor's model, a scandalous thing to do at the time, appearing bare on screen. That is, not sculpting. It wasn't received well. In fact, you can't even watch it. There aren't any copies of it anywhere. It was basically erased from history. The only film of Munson's that we can still see is Purity, which came out the following year and also featured those bare scenes. It was banned outright. The aftermath of the banned films wasn't good for Munson, and things started to unravel pretty quickly. In 1919, while she was living in a Manhattan boarding house with her mother, a man named Dr. Walter Wilkins, who was Munson's physician, professed his love for her by killing his own wife so the two could be together. Munson and her mom then fled to Canada, and there was a nationwide search for the daughter-mother duo because of their apparent connection to the crime. It's a bit strange that they fled the way they did, but Munson would later testify in court that she didn't know anything about Wilson's intentions of killing his wife so they could be together. Her reputation as a bare model wasn't a good look for a lot of people around the country, though, and she was harassed to the point of insanity. In the years following the scandal, Audrey faced legal and financial troubles. She moved to upstate New York and sold kitchen utensils door to door, but her mental health deteriorated quickly. It's said that after her mother died in 1958, she went 25 years without anyone visiting her. She was truly forgotten. America's first female president. The United States may have narrowly missed out on having its first female president back in 2016, but nearly 100 years before that, the country sort of had one. In October 1919, President Woodrow Wilson was in the middle of a nationwide tour to convince his fellow politicians about the merits of his vision for the League of Nations, an alliance that he hoped would prevent another world war. Spoiler alert, there was another one. Wilson was apparently working himself to the bone, and during the tour he collapsed from exhaustion. He was taken back to the White House, where he then suffered a massive stroke. Wilson was in pretty bad shape, but his administration kept the severity of his condition a secret, telling everyone that he was just a little sick and he needed some rest. For a year and 5 months, his wife Edith was the de facto leader of the country, kind of like a regent when a king is either too young or too sick to rule. Edith Wilson was quite the character. Born Edith Bowling to a poor family in rural West Virginia, she apparently dropped out of college because she thought her dorm room was too cold. She wound up marrying a wealthy jewelry store owner named Norman Galt in Washington, D.C., but he died 12 years into the marriage. Widowed but rich, Edith became a bit of a socialite. She started traveling to Paris a lot. She made waves by being the first woman to drive her own car around D.C. Then, in 1915, she met the president. Woodrow Wilson's first wife had died a year earlier. He was still serving his first term of office and was up for re-election in 1916. When he met Edith, it was love at first sight. The two were married just 3 months later, against the advice of Wilson's campaign managers, who didn't think remarrying so soon would be a good look for his re-election bid. Turns out it was fine. Edith Galt became Edith Wilson, and Woodrow Wilson was re-elected the following year. Woodrow Wilson started sharing everything with his new wife: classified documents, wartime codes, his correspondences with influential leaders. So when he had his stroke, It was only natural that Edith step in and take the reins. Anyone who wanted to meet with the president or communicate with him had to go through Edith first. Any kind of policy papers or important documents were handed over to her. She'd look them over and then bring them to her husband. While she later wrote that she never made a single decision regarding the disposition of public affairs, it was clear that she had a whole lot of influence. Edith remained the shadowy acting president until Woodrow's second term finished in 1921. He remained in poor health and died 2 years later in 1923. Edith would live on until 1961, when she died on her late husband's birthday. Queen Hatshepsut. One of ancient Egypt's most successful pharaohs was also one of the empire's least remembered. That's because Pharaoh Hatshepsut's stepson tried to have her erased from history. Hatshepsut's reign, which lasted from 1479 to 1458 BC during the 18th dynasty, saw Egypt flourish culturally and economically, but her reign also had a whole lot of family drama that led to one of the few female pharaohs nearly being forgotten entirely. When Pharaoh Thutmose II died, his son, Thutmose III, was still too young to rule. So Thutmose II's wife, Hatshepsut, stepped in to rule as regent until Thutmose III came of age. Thutmose III wasn't Hatshepsut's son, though, and she probably wasn't too keen on having him rule as pharaoh. At some point, Hatshepsut took full control of the empire and sidelined her stepson. This worked out great for Egypt. Trade flourished, and there were not any major wars. She constructed some magnificent temples. She started building monuments of herself sporting a beard, possibly to legitimize her rule. But when she died, and we don't know exactly how she did, Thutmose III came to power and things changed. Her stepson ordered the defacement and destruction of statues, monuments, and inscriptions that had Hatshepsut's name and image. Her cartouches were chiseled out. Well, that sounds like a violation. Cartouches were little oval inscriptions with hieroglyphs inside that gave the name and title of the Egyptian nobility, kind of like a royal name tag. Some of the temples that Hatshepsut had built during her reign were altered or torn apart completely. Statues at her famous mortuary temple, Deir el-Bahari, were torn down and buried in a pit. Thutmose even had his own inscriptions and cartouches placed over Hatshepsut's, basically repurposing her achievements as his own. Thutmose then snuffed out any references to Hatshepsut in official records and the official king lists. Her name was systematically removed from most documents, effectively erasing her existence as a pharaoh. Thutmose III's campaign to erase his stepmother from history was pretty successful during his lifetime, but it didn't quite stick. There is evidence that during the Ptolemaic dynasty and in Roman times, there were efforts to recover her legacy and restore her name on certain monuments and inscriptions. Agent 355. This next person might be the most important figure of the American Revolutionary War that no one has heard about. Agent 355 is one of the most enigmatic figures of the American Revolution. Now, we don't know much about Agent 355 other than the fact that she was a she. Agent 355 was the code name of a female spy who played a pivotal role in George Washington's intelligence gathering network known as the Culper Ring, which played an important role in defeating the British during the war. Agent 355 operated in the heart of British-occupied New York City, a hotbed of political and military activity during the Revolutionary War. We don't know her real name or background, but it's thought that she might have been a socialite or an influential woman with a lot of friends in high places. Agent 355 used her social connections to infiltrate British gatherings and events where she could secretly gather information about British military plans and their troop movements. She then passed on what she found over to the other members of the Culper Ring, who would then relay it on to General George Washington himself. The intelligence provided by Agent 355 and her fellow spies during the war helped Washington outfox the British. Her reports helped expose enemy strategies and contributed to the success of American military operations. But it's not even certain that Agent 355 existed at all. The only mention of her in historical records describes her as a lady who may have assisted the Patriots, but doesn't definitively identify her as a spy. The primary source that mentions Agent 355 is a letter written by George Washington's intelligence officer, Benjamin Tallmadge. In the letter, dated September 22, 1778, Tallmadge mentions that a lady of considerable talent had provided valuable information that helped the Patriots outwit them all. But this brief reference doesn't give us any more details about her activities or identity. Despite the lack of concrete proof, the legend of Agent 355 has lived on in popular culture. Authors and filmmakers have been drawn to the mysterious figure of a female spy operating in New York City's turbulent Revolutionary War period. A bunch of fictionalized accounts of Agent 355 escapades have popped up over the years, further blurring the line between fact and legend. And you know what they say about fact and legend. What other history topics do you want to learn about? Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more Nutty History.